Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm George Moss again here at allpointstv.com. We're very glad to have you with us here and also over at the other studio, 92.1 on the radio, and that's WFOV. I'm very glad to have all of the persons here because we are trying to do some things in the studios, two studios, that no one else is doing and covering some information that nobody else is covering. It's not that they're not doing a good job in their domain, but we have a domain to cover also. I want to go through a couple of things. First of all, to go back and do a summary of some things we've covered so far, and then we're going to go beyond that and cover some of the territory. But I want to talk about some of the things we've already covered. We've covered, for example, the impeachment process, and I've said before that very few people, even in the scholarly community, seem to understand it. The impeachment process is not the removal of the president necessarily or the civil office holders. The impeachment process is one in which you will, in fact, bring charges against a federal office holder based upon the language in Article 1, Section 2, Clause 5, which covers impeachment in the House of Representatives. And then if the person is impeached by a majority vote in the House, then it's referred to the Senate for trial, and that is in fact contained in Article 1, Section 3, Clause 6. What they're doing, a lot of the scholars, what they're doing is they're going into Article 2, Section 4, and they are talking about what it requires if you're going to remove a president, and that is a different part of the Constitution in Article 2, where it states that the president, vice president, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. But I want you to understand the location of the language. Article 1 is where you have the impeachment process set up. And what the framers did is that they separated the impeachment process itself from another part of the impeachment, which is the removal, using the impeachment process to remove an office holder from office. And that's in Article 2. What I think that Alan Dershowitz, I've been mentioning his name quite a bit because a lot of persons consider him to be the top constitution, not the top, but one of the top constitutional scholars in the country. I don't know why, but it's probably because he's taught at Harvard University, which used to be the premier university in the United States and one of the premier universities in the world, but it's not that now. And it's been brought to its present status by people like Alan Dershowitz. This is not the scholarly institution it was when W.B. Du Bois, for example, went there in his sojourn and coming out of Harvard University in 1895. It's not that university, it's this university today, which more or less is the equivalent of a junior college. They don't have the revered scholars there that they once had. But when I hear him talking, I'm talking about Alan Dershowitz here, and when I hear him talking about the Constitution, it really is shocking, some of the claims that have been made by this man who taught, he's an emeritus now, so he's no longer at the university, but he's an emeritus, having been a revered professor there during his tenure. But it's really shocking to hear him talk about the Constitution and make some of the claims that have been made. For example, the idea of birthright citizenship, that's not in the Constitution. And if you go, they're quoting they're quoting Amendment 14, and they claim that Amendment 14, which every black person in the country should be outraged. They're using this language to justify bringing people in or having people come in and normalizing their citizenship based upon the passage of an amendment that was placed in the Constitution in the aftermath of the Civil War. And to say that this amendment, which was to, in fact, bring to a much more whole level, to make holistic the citizenship of blacks in this country, to now have them say that that is something that brings about birthright citizenship. If you come outside the country and you land inside the country and you have a child here, that child is automatically a citizen of the United States. And to use that language that's passed for the slaves, the former slaves, which are freed by the 13th Amendment, and the 14th Amendment, which was to bring them into citizenship, because the establishment was one in which they were in limbo because they were not slaves, but they were not citizens either. And so to deal with that limbo situation where their citizenship was in question, the 14th Amendment was passed. And so it says that all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, and that would be language placed there to exclude and also to include. Exclude those who would do what Dirch was talking about, coming into the country, having a child, and you become a citizen. No, it excludes that by saying the jurisdiction thereof. So all persons born naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. It doesn't say subject to the laws. All people inside this country right now are subject to the laws of the United States. If you break the laws here, then there should be a penalty imposed upon you, because the laws are for all the ones inside the borders at a certain period of time inside the country. Although you can break in this country now and then claim asylum, and these silly politicians are excusing that as if we don't have immigration laws in this country. And we'll talk about that hopefully at some point during this program. But all laws are supposed to be enforced in this country, passed by our legislature that passes laws, and then those laws are supposed to be enforced by the law enforcement officers, the chief of whom is the President of the United States on Article 2 of the Constitution. But we can throw pretty much all of that to the wind, as what is said in this book right here by Judge Andrew Napolitano, The Constitution in Exile. And it is an exile in terms of people just running all over it and running through it, misappropriating language and making it say things it doesn't say and things of that sort. But the impeachment process is just one part of it. And then the other part is this, well, there's a lot of parts to it, but it's misunderstood in a lot of its dimensions. Because I do contend that this country is not a very literate society anymore. It was much more literate before the government took over the public school systems, and then when they took it over on both the state and federal levels, we saw a decline in the educational acumen of the people of the United States, and we've been going down ever since. You have government get involved in anything, I guarantee you that which was in place before begin to encroach upon the institutions. Once they get involved in that encroachment, then it will in fact be much less than it was before the encroachment took place. And that's no less the case with these schools that are turning out pretty much people that cannot even read. Talking about morons, that's the least of it. It's even worse than that in some cases. People just cannot even think. But I'm listening to these scholars, and I'm beginning to think these scholars got a certain amount of that problem, because what they're saying about the Constitution is not true. The impeachment process, you don't have to have a crime. Alan Dirch will say you have to have a crime in order to bring about impeachment. I want him to show me where it says that in the Constitution, and where did he get that from? If he's quoting Article 2, Section 4, I would remind him that the impeachment process is not found in Article 2. The impeachment process is found in Article 1. And then they start, and then they say that if you come, all of them have bought into, the courts have bought into, that if you have a child on the soil of the United States, then that child is automatically a citizen of the United States. A citizen of the United States. You know, it's really sad that we have people like this leading this country. This is a great country, but it's not made great by these people. This country is not made great by members of the Supreme Court. They've injured this country. Go read Mark Levine's book called The Men in Black. The Supreme Court has been just as bad in terms of casting a very bad constitutional spell on this country, as has been the case with these presidents and these members of Congress. All of them have been bad. The only great president we've had, and I keep saying this over and over again, I'm waiting for somebody to contradict me in this, we've had one great president in this country, The rest of them have been, at best, mediocre. And if they stay on the sideline and would be mediocre, that's the intention of politicians, of the Constitution toward politicians, for them to remain on the sideline. They're not supposed to be involved in all these things they're involved in. 2/3 to 3/4 of the things that our government is doing our government is doing right now, those things that it's engaged in are unconstitutional. And so when you look at what the Constitution requires, which is a limited government, where we have people operating in government under the enumeration of powers, in Article 1, Section 8, you can see that the founders, who are the greatest statesmen this country has produced, as founders, I didn't say as politicians, but as founders, they were the greatest statesmen probably in the history of the world. I don't think there's anybody that can come close to it as far as persons that were in fact setting up the parameters of government. Fortunately for them, they did it before they were installed themselves in power. So as outsiders trying to find the formula to establish good government, or the auspices of it by limiting government and so on in its reach, they did a tremendous job the world had never seen before. I'm not crediting them as governors themselves, because they were not as good governors as they were statesmen. As far as I'm talking about statesmen that put the Constitution together, people that wrote the Declaration of Independence, mainly Thomas Jefferson, but he did have some help on the committee, made up of 5 persons, and then it was sent out to the Continental Congress to endorse it, and they had some things that they had to say about it and change some of the language in it. But it was a document, these 2 documents put in place by those that were some of the greatest thinkers this country has produced. And really the founders were the first intellectuals in this country. And so far, despite what Alan Dershowitz would have us believe, they are the last intellectuals, because this country produced no intellectuals after the founders. They were in a class by themselves. And I'll tell you one of the formulas here. Anytime anyone in these bodies, Elizabeth Warren and these other persons, are now talking about changing anything the founders did, and they want to come behind them as if they know better than they knew and they want to change it, anyone who makes that claim should be turned out immediately out of office whenever they run again for the office they hold. If they're senators, they serve 6 years. If they're members of the House, they serve 2 years. And if anyone in those bodies is talking about changing anything that was put in place by the framers, and they've changed enough already. The framers did not intend a lot of these things that we're doing right now. And we've done all these things to the detriment of this country. The 16th Amendment, that was never intended. They changed that, and look where we are right now. If a government is out of control, bigger than whatever was intended by the framers, and it's gotten so disproportionately out of control that you cannot rein this government in because the bureaucracy is too large. And we have an out of control political system in this country that is impossible to rein in under the present pretensions of the Constitution, because they're broken from underneath the Constitution. The Constitution is indeed in exile, as Napolitano says in his book.
Yeah, there would be. I've always wondered about that. I'm a libertarian, and we sit around there, me and the other libertarians, we talk about scaling back government. Then you realize that there's a lot of people's lives that are attached to the way things are done now. And the people I have real serious problems with, just dealing real harshly with, are those who become part of the system because they're forced to pay into it and now have to depend on that for their livelihood or for their existence. Mm-hmm. But the ones I have real rancor towards are the ones who push for that, because they created an artificial class of people, that now is going to be, you can't walk away from. You can't be so hard-hearted about it. You got to be realistic. These people are not just going to die off or go away, and you don't expect that. You shouldn't have that. But the whole system is set up now where you got all these people dependent on a system that should never have been in place in the first place.
You're making a great point, and I don't want to see anyone hurt. I don't want anybody's employment cut away. I don't want anybody's family suffering. I don't want any of that. What I want is the government that was intended by the framers, and I want the country that they intended, and I want the one back that they took from us, and that's what I'm arguing here. These claims that are being made by these so-called scholars, those claims are not found in the documents written by the framers. And anytime they say things that are not prescient in the document, they have to be called on it, because we're supposed to be, and it was intended for us to be, a constitutional republic, where there was a two-tiered layer of government in this country, one on the federal level, and of course the other level would be that of the states. And the two working together in their different responsibilities with power allocated on both levels, so that each corridor of power, first of all, is disaggregated on the federal level through the three branches of government, and then is divided again on the federal and state level, where each of those two parties was supposed to have certain authorities allocated to it. And part of it was part of it is found in the 10th Amendment. States' rights. They've actually taught us, because they've been brainwashing the people in this country. I think really everybody in the country has been brainwashed. We're trying to get away. We're trying to get back to what Herbert Hoover talked about. We're trying to get back to normalcy. We are brainwashed in this country. This idea of states' rights is like, when you say states' rights, everybody start talking about, begin to think about slave cotton fields. As if people are talking about states' rights as a way of returning this country back to the glory days, quote unquote, to the land of Dixie. And we're talking about the enslavement and so on and so forth. States' rights was intended by the framers, because if the states don't have the rights that were intended for them, you cannot have the states then having the sovereignty that would in fact hold the federal government to its responsibilities and to the limitation of power that was allocated to the federal government by the states.
Like the 16th Amendment, which was passed in the 1900s, about the creation of the allowance for collecting direct income taxes on the people. I've had well-meaning liberals try to tell me we're intended to be a socialist country from the onset. And I'm looking at the original the amendments that were in place when we had the Constitution, and right after the Constitution was adopted, and went, where is that apparatus in place to gather taxes? That wasn't until like 1900s.
1913.
Yeah, so like over 100 some years after the fact this country was in existence. So I mean, I don't see how their argument's so valid. They're just so smug about it. I mean, and I talked to people who are college educated and went, they had no apparatus to collect taxes to allow for the creation of a welfare state. How could this have been permitted underneath the original intent? I mean,
John, so people are telling you that this country was intended as a socialist republic?
Is
that what they're claiming?
Yeah, see, because they I don't know where they get it. I mean, I think a lot of them are smoked too much leafy green substances and are now trying to pontificate about something they're really lacking, or they've forgotten because they have smoked too much of this leafy, smoky, green substance. But it's like, no, there is no. You could do these things. You have to have money coming in from somewhere, and that wasn't created until much later. And you just can't make these people see that.
John, maybe they haven't read where they were trying to look in the federal treasury to apportion some money out of it to fit a circumstance of one of the citizens that had come into hardship. And it was none other than James Madison that said that it behooves me, and I'm paraphrasing his wording, but I'm certainly making the same point he made. It behooves me to find the language in the Constitution where we are assigned to make the government benevolent, meaning the government would be able to pour its treasure out in a benevolent way to those that were in need. That was not. It's not that Madison was being hard. Madison understood the role of government. Government has a very limited role, and if the society is one in which its members are cemented together as a United States, then the people themselves will develop the charity so that those things that need to be taken care of will be taken care of by the people. But government does not have the role to be acting in the way of opening the treasury up so that you take, because by doing that, what you're doing is you're taking money from those who've earned it, because you have to tax in order to be able to do that, and then you're giving to those who've not earned it. And it will go to the heart of when you're working for someone else, to the benefit of someone other than yourself, and you're working and so on and taking your money from you. What is that other than the people being enslaved? You can enslave people by taxation. And the framers did not intend a socialist republic. The framers intended a constitutional republic and a capitalist system. That's what Ayn Rand is saying, and she's exactly right. The one mistake that they made is that they did not make capitalism explicit in the Constitution. They made it implicit. See, limited government, by restraining government in Article 1, Section 8, and then itemizing what government can do, those restraints on government is laissez-faire. Isn't that true?
Now, our friend Chris Levels brought that up years ago to me. It never dawned on me. I always heard capitalism.
They can't do this, that, and other. If you allocate, then you cannot do the other things not allocated.
Well, see, capitalism was always brought up by the people when I was hearing it, because, I was like growing up in the 60s and 70s and 80s too. But anyway, the people who are using that term is usually to use in a derogatory fashion. And it's usually by people leaning towards the left. The capitalism, and Chris Levels made a point to me in a conversation. He goes, before they came around, when our creation of our country, that was just considered the way things were. Like, hands off, you let things go.
Right.
And he said that the term capitalism came about, it was better more about after Marx and his theory. And he made a valid point.
Yeah. John, when you made the statement about laissez-faire, and I was also alluding to it, laissez-faire comes out of John, Baptiste Colbert. You ever heard that name? He was the finance minister of Louis XIV.
I heard the name, but I haven't read his works.
Okay. He was one of those persons that went to the entrepreneurs, the commercialists, the business people, the motors. This Ayn Rand calls them the motors of society, the ones that make things move. Not the talkers. Those are the politicians. The ones that Donald Trump says all they do is talk. That's all they do, and that's why they were intended to be over there in a corner somewhere. And here they are situating themselves in all of these things. But Colbert went to meet with the commercialists, and he was doing all these things, trying to help them, and so on and so forth. And he asked the people in business, he says, well, what can we do? Meaning the government, the politicians. And they answered, laissez-vous faire, meaning what the government can do is leave us alone. And that's what we had in the United States when they wrote the Constitution. We had laissez-faire as the way government ought to operate. Government should leave us alone. And that's what we find in the Constitution. The problem is what I said earlier, and Ayn Rand pointed this out, and I think she's exactly right in this, is that the problem is that capitalism is implied in the Constitution. It would have been better, because you couldn't see down the line. Karl Marx had not written his book at this point about communism. The Communist Manifesto was not written until 1848. So you could not see that we'd have people in government like this airhead, Alexandria Cortez, who doesn't know anything. This woman is very dangerous, and not to mention very stupid. This woman does not even know how ignorant she is. And that's stupid aplenty there. If you don't, there are three people that know, and there are those who know, and there are those who don't know, and then there are those who don't know that they don't know. And she's the latter of those three, doesn't know that she doesn't know. And these people are running the government right now. We have people that are in charge, that are trying to change that which is written by those that did know. And we're coming up on a break, so we're going to take a break at this point from WFOV. and they'll be back in 4 minutes. We'll be glad to have you back in 4 minutes. And we will continue what we're talking about here at allpointstv.com. When you come back, we won't be very far away from where you left. We're glad to have you. We'll see you in 4 minutes. The people that are running this government, and the people also that are advising as scholars and things of that sort, these people are injuring this country. This is a great country, but it's being destroyed from within by people who are basically, I don't want to say miscreants, but they're misinforming us about what was really intended. And anyway, I'll tell you this, because we can fix this problem, but we can't fix it with the people we have in power right now. In order to fix this problem, we're going to have to do what Peter Schweizer talks about in his book called, well, the title of the book tells what we ought to do. What we ought to do is throw them all out. This book right here, throw them all out. And that means Democrats and Republicans. Both of them. Neither one of these parties have the morality and the ethics to run this country. And the American people are going to have to wake up to who they have in the nation's capital. In fact, I heard, who was that that was speaking the other day? The one that tried to get to plead guilty and refused to do so. They never charged him, and then when they shut the investigation down, when Mueller shut his investigation down, the person was never tried. John, you remember that name of that person that did that? They shut that person, they wanted him to plead guilty when he wasn't guilty of anything, and he refused to do so. Anyway, when he was talking about it, he would call them thugs. And that's the term I've used about them. I think that that's an accurate statement. That's who they are. These people are. We have a criminal enterprise in Washington D.C. and they are misappropriating the language of the Constitution to apply to things that were never intended for the Constitution to be applied to. They are saying things that are not in the document. The scholars are doing that, and also the politicians are doing it to fit an agenda that they have well thought out, and that they have invoked, and that they are carrying out. In fact, to undermine the intentionalities of the framers. And they are doing that on a regular basis. And if they continue down this road, it's going to lead to the socialist state, but that's not intended by the framers. The framers intended to have the government hands off, and the government doing a limited number of things in terms of carrying out responsibilities assigned to it by the Constitution and restraining it in other ways than in which those allegations of its powers are not in fact delegated. We have an enumeration of powers, and those enumeration of powers that tell the Congress, tell the president, and tell the courts. These are the rules of which you have to abide by. These are the restraints, and here are the sovereignty issues. And what we have right now is they have broken from underneath the document, and they've broken from underneath all the restraints, and they're now doing anything they want to do. We have government that's out of control in Washington, D.C. And now they're talking about changing some other things, as if they're not done enough damage. They're talking about changing some other things. They're talking about changing the Electoral College because they say that it's undemocratic. Elizabeth Warren, you know, I listen to these politicians, and I can see how, first of all, if she believes that, she's ignorant. The Electoral College is not anti-democratic. I said this a couple of weeks ago. The Electoral College is super democratic. You have to keep in mind what was intended by the framers. We did not want to have a democracy in this country because the majority rule is where you have the majority that would be oppressive of the minority. And so if you have that, you have a problem, because anytime you can vote by a majority voice, then the minority voice can't be heard. And so their rights will be disemboweled. And you want to have their rights maintained. So how do you do that? let me pause for a minute and just say I want to welcome back WFOV. And we're not very far away from where we were when you left. As always, we try to stay within the range, so when you come back, you're not too far removed from what we're talking about. The framers had to think about that. And Elizabeth Warren is just another person that's running, that's in power, and has no respect, because she doesn't have any knowledge, first of all, of the foundation of this country. And she doesn't have any respect for that which is put in place by the framers that made this country great. Let me tell you, this country is great because of the foundation that's put in place here. It's not made great by anything that any politician has done in the history of this country. And nobody in this country can name anything they've done that has made this country great except one person, and that's George Washington. And George Washington made the country great by, in fact, refusing to allow them, based upon his presence as one of the 5 great men in the world at that time, and George Washington was one of those 5 great men in the world at that time, he refused to allow them to do what Alexander Hamilton had in mind to do. And that's create a monarch over here in the United States. And George Washington, to his great credit, refused to allow them to replicate on this land, this soil, what they had fought against in the Revolutionary War. He was too great for that. And he was not one of those persons that was, in fact, this is what's so rare about him, he wasn't one of those persons that when he obtained power, wanted to hold on to it, such as some of these monarchs in the world right now. You can name a lot of them, don't have to go into it here. But when people obtain power, they don't want to give power up. And that's what we have these professional politicians up there in Washington right now. It was never intended to have these jokers stay in power forever. Supposed to go to Washington, get some work done within your expertise. Once you've exhausted that, you've done those things, remedied the situation you went to Washington to remedy, you go back home and to your job. They go to Washington and stay. And that in and of itself is criminal. Because the longer you are in Washington, the more you are, in fact, involved in the paymaster aspects of it. Because you have to be reelected and reelected and reelected, and that means you have to raise money. And raising money, that means you have to have people coming to you with a fistful of dollars. No, this is not the movie starring Clint Eastwood. This is not the movie version. This is the Washington, D.C. version. They go to Washington with a fistful of dollars, and if they don't put that money in that coffer for those politicians who are running for re-election over and over again, then they have the power then to make your life difficult in the jobs that you have. And that's where the corruption process starts. It's a revolving door type thing. Every election, the money changes. The business people carry money to Washington to buy these politicians off, to buy them off for coming after their businesses. And I can give you the documents for that, but that's the way it works in Washington. These people are exactly what this I can't think of his name right now, the one that, I'm trying to think of his name, about the one that said they're thugs. But he's not the only one calling them thugs, because that's, a lot of people understand how Washington operates. It is a criminal enterprise. It's not a swamp. It is a criminal enterprise being run by these politicians. And what we need to do, if we want to resolve this problem, we're going to have to put an end to it ourselves. Peter Schweizer, the subtitle of his book, How Politicians and Their Friends Get Rich Off Insider Stock Trades, Land Deals, and Cronyism. They will send the rest of us to prison. And his remedy for that is to throw them all out, the Democrats and the Republicans. A lot of people in this town think that I'm a Republican. You got to be kidding. But I don't deny that I'm a Republican in terms of what the word means. But I'm not a Republican in terms of the Republican Party. I wouldn't dare describe myself as a Republican in that sense, because there are no Republicans in the Republican Party, and there are no Democrats in the Democratic Party. And I keep saying that over and over again because I want to drive home that these two parties have names that again misdirect the American people. But I just want you to be aware that there are people out here saying things that are not true. The 14th Amendment does not give anybody the right to come on this soil and have a child in this country. And the child is automatically a citizen. And Alan Dershowitz and others that are saying that, I want you to come here and show it to me. You don't read. One thing I know, I read a lot better than they do. And when I was down at the university here in this town, I'll be honest with you, I was stunned in those seminars. And when it came down to writing in my department, I did all the writing. But it stunned me because, you know, we think of, in fact, I was stunned when I went to college. Because college to me, I was a very poor kid, so to me, going to college was a big deal because nobody in my neighborhood had ever gone to college, and I didn't have anyone tell me how it was how it was going to be once I arrived there. I didn't know. No one had ever told me about it. So I went there to the universities, and I thought that's where all the scholars were housed because my community was not made up of scholars. It was made of people that had a lot of dignity, but they did not have a lot of scholarship.
You know what my experience with the universities and colleges I went to is most of the people were in classrooms teaching were great regurgitators. That's all they were. They're not great thinkers or anything. They were holding you contempt that they thought you just regurgitated stuff you heard growing up, but they did the same thing.
That's right, John. And it required the students to do the same thing because that's what they do. They want you to regurgitate what they say, and they're regurgitating what they read. But I was just quite frankly stunned because I was of the opinion that all the scholars were kind of like situated, concentrated in those universities, and to arrive there would be really some come upwards from where I was in my community, because I was not surrounded by people that had degrees. There were a lot of ethics in the community. People had a lot of values. I give them a lot of credit for that. People that were honest, tremendously so. But in terms of people saying, when you go to college now, you don't forget this, this, and this, because this is what I faced when I was there. I didn't have anybody directing me that way. And my first shock was when we took the first test. I'll never forget it. There were 100 students in that class, and we sat every seat apart. So you sat here, the other guy sat 2 seats over, and then 2 seats over from him, another person, then somebody over here. In row ahead of you. It was a very large, auditorium kind of a place. And the teacher was in front of the room and walked to the back of the room very fast. I heard a sound like this right here, with books closing. I'm so naive. It sounded like people had their books open, and I'm sitting in there stunned. So I couldn't believe it. So then he walked to the front of the room, and I heard the same sound. I heard one after the other. I knew then books were being closed. So I leaned over. I'll never forget. I mentioned his name. I don't think he'll hear this conversation. I don't know if he's still alive or not. But I was sitting next to one seat over from Reverend Whitney, and I'll never forget his name. And when I heard this book closing, my mouth fell open. I leaned over and said, are they cheating in here? I asked them if they were cheating in here, because I could not believe that was going on in those classrooms. And that's my first test. And then I learned some other things as I went through the 4-year process, well, 3.5-year process, and for me. And I quite frankly, was stunned by how people are getting through these universities. People going in there like the candidates, having people go in there and take your test for you. You know, that's just the way not everyone that has a degree has earned that degree. And you'd be surprised at some of the names I can mention of people that's in the forefront of society right now that plagiarize their way through the university. And I don't know, I'm not saying Alan Dershowitz, but when I listen to this man talking about the Constitution, I'm not making any claim here, don't have any evidence. And I don't speak from outside my evidence, so if I don't have some document that says X, Y, and Z, I'm not going to say X, Y, and Z. But it makes me wonder when I hear this man talking about the Constitution and what he makes claims of, this founding document, and I know those claims are not there, it makes me wonder about whether or not he achieved his scholarship through going through it. But I don't have any evidence otherwise, but I'm just saying that it makes me wonder. Because I know that what he's saying here, no person that understands the Constitution has even read it from a peripheral standpoint would say the things that Alan Dershowitz has been saying. And I'm sorry. There is no birthright citizenship in this country. I'll tell you another thing these scholars are saying, and we weren't able to find this out until 1948 in the Everett versus the Board of Education case in Virginia case in 1948. In the Everett case, that's where they began to talk about having found a provision in the Constitution that separates the church and the state. And it was further decided upon in a case in 1962 in the Engel versus Vitale case, where they said there is a separation of the church and the state that is mandated in the First Amendment of the United States. The First Amendment, which states that it does not give any freedom, by the way. This is what people are saying about this document. Another thing that's also wrong is there's a Bill of Rights in the Constitution. I've been saying this over a period of time. There's no Bill of Rights in the Constitution. People that cannot read are telling us there's a Bill of Rights. These are further restraints placed upon power in this country because of the paranoia. There's good paranoia and bad paranoia. The good paranoia of the framers, they were finicky and afraid of power, even wielded by themselves. And they wanted to restrain it, and to their great credit, Elizabeth Warren and others that are at war, and they're at war with the American people, there's no doubt about that, but they're at war with the founders of this country, every last one of them. 535 members of the Congress right now of the United States are at war with the founders of this country. There's not one of them, not a single one in Congress that has any respect for the framers. And if they did, they would not be up there as career politicians. It was never intended by the framers to have these vultures. People that don't want to work, the people want to sit down all day long and order other people's lives around and tell them what to do. Never, and then tell them what the document written by the framers says and act upon it as if they know best, and the people out here don't know, and so they're going to tell us what the framers said, and we have the document in our hands, can read it for ourselves. And then we have people like Alan Dershowitz and others from some of these top, quote unquote, top universities telling us the document states is not even found in the document. I want any of you scholars to show me where there's birthright citizenship in the Constitution of the United States. Show it to me. Show me where you have in the Constitution a Bill of Rights. Show me that. You've been saying that for all this time. I'll tell you another thing. You pointed this out a couple of weeks ago. None of you scholars, none, have said that the Constitution defines what it means to be a natural-born citizen, and reason for that is because all you people in Congress right now and all you people in government right now are Hamiltonians. Isn't that true? Oh, you're well disguised, but you're Hamiltonians. You know, that's why you have that's why you have this. You make a play about Alexander Hamilton. I tell you what you won't do. You won't make a play about James Madison. Let me see that. James Madison lived a very intriguing and fruitful and purposeful life. There are a lot of things I don't agree there are some things he did, I'll be talking about next week, that I wish he had not done, but the things he did are consequential. So let's focus on that. What he did in terms of bringing all the different elements together and bringing about compromise necessary to bring the document into existence and the country into existence, that has some value to it. I'll be talking about next week how some of that was not as good as it appeared at that time, and I'll go into that when we talk about the so-called Civil War, because some of the foundations for it were laid there 74 years before this war broke out. Because in 1861, this war broke out, it's because of a lot of things that were in fact put in place in 1787. 74 years later, we see this rupture that occurred. And James Madison must take some credit, for that. And I'll go into that in some detail, which has been missed by all of these quote unquote scholars. But they're saying, these scholars now telling us, because they're Hamiltonians. See, either that and it could be the other thing too. They could be Hamiltonians, meaning that they wanted to expand the power of government, which is what Hamilton wanted to do, by telling us that there were implied powers in the express powers. In other words, we can look at the implication of the language and then we can imply it means something other than what's specifically stated. But in the language, we can expand the language because it implies some other things as well. That's what the Hamiltonians were arguing. And that's why they were saying that, that's why they were passing the 1790 bill that would have, when it tried to expand upon natural-born citizenship. The Hamiltonians did that. If you go back and read it, you'll see the Hamiltonians that were the ones that wrote the Naturalization Act of 1790. And then if you read the one in 1795, the reason why they read differently is because the Hamiltonians wrote the one in 1790 and James Madison wrote the one in 1795. That's why they differ. And go read that one clause in it where they differ, and you'll see that one was trying to expand up on what you mean by natural born, and the other one, and what you meant by how they tried to say that it implies natural born citizenship in the Naturalization Act, and the other one took out the word natural born in the language in 1795 because you cannot go back and fix the Constitution through a law passed by the Congress. The way you amend the Constitution is in Article 5. And they tried to amend it through tried to amend the Constitution in the Naturalization Act, and tried to tell us that the Naturalization Act will also, in that act, you have a definition of natural-born citizen. These were the Hamiltonians that did that. Now they're telling the Hamiltonians today, and we still have Hamiltonians today. We're living right now, folks, in Hamilton's country. This is Hamilton country. This is not the country. See, Hamilton lost at the Constitution Convention. It does not mean, it means that in losing, that he did not accept the defeat. He continued to work at it, just like the people right now in Washington. They lost. Mueller made his report, and they lost. They thought they had the outsider, the person sent there by the people. I'm not saying Donald Trump is anything other than who Donald Trump is. He's a rich man who loves his country. He's a person that went there because he did not want to see this country driven down by these imposters. That's why he's there.
Could you imagine how bad they reacted to him? If even one of us just had the chance of getting maybe somebody with who won the lotto to finance our campaign, okay, that kind of scenario, and we were in position that he's in now, they would have us removed. They'd have their deep state off us so quick. They wouldn't even be allowed to swear us into the we wouldn't even be able to hold our inauguration. They would have whacked you. They would have whacked the Reverend.
John, that's what's going on here. This man came from nowhere and broke into this club where these criminals, these money changers, these temple dwellers operate.
Feel betrayed because I think Donald Trump, they always thought he was in on that with them because he's always a registered Democrat. And that book right here by Jerome Tussell, or whatever his name is, I have it right here. He's always aligned with himself and the Democratic Party in New York and New Jersey. Mm-hmm. They feel betrayed. That's what it is.
Yeah, they feel betrayed. And they also understand that as an outsider that has not come up through the ranks, he has not been corrupted by the process. And it's just like when you have someone that has their hand in the cookie jar, and you're there, and you don't have your hand in the cookie jar, you are witness to these other persons, and therefore you are a threat to what they're doing because you're not involved in that. Donald Trump doesn't have to have his hand in the cookie jar. Donald Trump doesn't even get his salary from the government, $400,000 that is now designated for the President of the United States. He doesn't even receive a salary because he doesn't need it. And all those guys are money changers. So he's a threat to them in that sense. But look at what they did. Mueller came out. They were so assured that Mueller would come out with a report because they knew Mueller was in on the game. Mueller was working for these people. And they knew that Mueller, being one of their own members, just look at his background. And they thought that they would get him to come out with a charge against his president, which they would then use to bring about impeachment. But Mueller had to also be careful in terms of not uncovering what the deal was about, because the deal was that Mueller was there as an attack dog. But you have to be careful of how you come out of the covert into overt and show the American people what this is really about. Many people have not figured it out yet. This is an attempt to overthrow the government, the elected government. This was an attempt to repudiate the verdict put in place by 63 million people who went to the polls on November the 8th, 2016, and voted this president into power. And they were trying to repudiate that verdict because they disagreed with it. So when that didn't happen, look what they did. When Mueller came out with his report that tried to leave some doors open to come at this president a different way at a different time through different means and different persons, they didn't get what they wanted. So now the latest thing is, here's the Congress now, Nadler and some of these others, this guy over there in California, Adam Schiff, they're now talking about they want Donald Trump's tax returns. Can you imagine putting the tax returns in the hands of politicians? Is that the role of politicians? Is that show me where that's in the Constitution. Show me where there's respect for the separation of powers. Where Article 1 separates the legislative branch from the Article 2, which sets up the executive branch. Show me where Article 1 allows the members of the Congress to demand that the president in Article 2 hand over his tax forms to members of Congress. Show me where it's in the Constitution.
American people should be more concerned of how people who are supposed to come through the ranks and now are senators and congressmen become multimillionaires, whereas and then not be so concerned about why a guy who is always on the radar, being a businessman, how he made his billions of dollars. I would be more questioning why these people sitting in office have more money than any of the people they allegedly are serving. Okay,
John, how we have they want to look at tax returns. You want to start talking about tax returns? You show me the tax returns of those 50% of the members of Congress. There are 535 members of Congress. 50% of them are millionaires. I want to see the tax returns to show where I can see how did people making $174,000 a year. I want to find out how do you do that. I never made $174,000 a year in salary, but if I can find out how you do it, maybe I don't become a millionaire. Maybe I can be in the $500,000 club. Maybe a quarter of a millionaire. Find out how you did how you arrived at the status that you have right now. Because 50% of the 535 members of Congress are millionaires, and they did it on a salary of $174,000 a year. And I want to find out how they did that. I know how Donald Trump did his. He did it in the private sector. How did they do theirs in the public sector? Off taxpayers' funding. How do they do that? So you start talking about these people running the government. I can tell you right now, we're not talking about Democrats and Republicans. We're talking about miscreants, we're talking about thugs, and we're talking about robber barons. And we've got to rein them in. Okay, we're going to get out of here. I want to, when I come back next week, I do want to go into some things we've been talking about for a couple of weeks now. I want to go into the so-called Civil War, and I want to also go into Watergate to show you how it ties into what we just had with the Mueller report. It's going to be very interesting. Stay tuned. Okay, let me get out of here. I want you to follow your dream. If you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.